Hi everyone. I'm not wearing flannel for once. So today I wanted to talk about ammunition, about rounds, because it was a bit of a revelation for me when I finally figured out how they worked and what the different calibers meant. And I figured, why not share that with you? So when people think of bullets, they're typically thinking of them, or when people think of rounds, rather, they're usually thinking of them as a single unit. They're not. They are divided into parts, and they only function because of those parts. We'll take this for example. This is 7.62 by 54R. It is the round that is typically used in your Mosin Nagants and things like that. It was a round used in World War II. And as you can see, it's pretty big. Just for comparison's sake, this is a snap cap or a dummy round. It's not real. It can't go off. Of a 7.62 by 39, which is the round used in AK-47s and things like that. Now, just look at that. This 7.62 by 39 is just barely bigger. No! That guy there is the bullet. That is the bit that gets exploded out and ends up in the target. This whole bit here is the shell casing. It contains a cartridge full of black powder, or whatever the chemical is used to explode and project the bullet out. Basically, it creates a controlled explosion. That little guy right there is the part that gets hit by the firing pin inside of a gun. A tiny little hammer or something like that pokes that real hard, and in so doing, it ignites an explosion within the cartridge, and that controlled energy flows up through this narrow hole here, and the sheer force of that explosion propels the bullet real fast. That is how these things work. So just to reiterate, bullet, shell casing, and on the inside is the cartridge. Now, of course, terminology may vary. I'm just going off of what I've learned. But typically you would call this whole thing, this entire singular unit, a round. But you would recognize that it is made of component or compound parts. That one was a pretty big one. That one was a pretty big one. It was also a pretty uncommon one. These are not very common rounds to be used in most guns. I just have them because I fucking love Sasha. Now, for comparison's sake, let's take a more common handgun round. This is the 38 Special. Now you can see there is a huge difference between them. For one thing, pistol rounds just generally aren't all that, strong. They don't have that much oomph to them. Of course, there are exceptions. Rifle rounds typically have a lot bigger of a shell casing and the cartridge inside that makes them explode. This functions the same way. Like the firing pin will strike that little guy right there, that'll push in, it'll ignite the cartridge, and then it'll propel the little bullet up and out. But as you can see, this bullet is not pointed, it is flattened, and it's rather small. And so is the cartridge that, creates the explosion that propels it out. This is a 357 Magnum. It's almost the same, almost identical, but you can see the 357 Magnum is just a little bit bigger, a little bit taller, which means that there's a bigger cartridge inside, or more grain count, or whatever, and the bullet is just a little bit bigger, has a little bit more mass, and so it's going to be projected differently. This is a lot stronger. And fun fact, 38 Special and 357 Magnum are partially interchangeable. A gun that's chambered in 38 Special will be able to fire 38 Special, but not 357 Magnum. However, a gun chambered in 357 Magnum can fire 357 Magnum and 38 Special, which gives you a little bit more versatility and leeway when you're, looking for ammo. So, just a little tip, if you're ever looking for a handgun or a revolver or whatever that's chambered to 38 Special or 357 Magnum, go for 357 Magnum, because then you'll be able to fire both of these. Just word to the wise. Here's the other thing about these rounds. You'll notice that, of course, there is a difference in the size and shape of the bullet and the size and shape of the cartridge. And there are two things to keep in mind when you're considering the caliber of a round. For one thing, how big is the bullet itself? How big is the physical projectile that's going to be projected to be exploded out onto the target? Like, how big is it? How much mass does it have? That will determine a lot. At the same time, the size of the cartridge and the force of the explosion is going to count for a lot too. So basically we have two variables that we're counting here. Mass, the force that a bullet can sort of punch you with, and speed, the strength of the explosion that creates the speed and velocity at which the bullet travels. Basically, you have to choose between speed and penetrating power or mass and stopping power. You want something that's going to hit you really hard, but perhaps not have as huge of a grain count? Or are you going to go for something that is really, really fast, but necessarily not as big? Of course, this is both big and fast, so, not exactly the best example. Anyway, this has been a crash course on calibers. I hope that you learned something. I had to figure all this out on my own. And I figure that unless you're part of more right-wing circles, you're probably not going to get this information for free. So, as leftists, I feel that we owe it to ourselves and to those who we want to protect to be literate in terms of caliber. It is essential. Because fascists, they know all about this stuff. They're intimately familiar. They're fucking incels who do nothing but, stroke themselves looking at guns and bullets. And as embarrassing as this is to say, we should probably do a little bit of the same. We need to learn what this is, what it means. We need to become literate. And that's part of what this channel is all about. So, thanks, comrades. I hope that you didn't hate this.